Our first speaker, Dr. Mir Baiz Khan, will speak on Ismaili Muslim refugees from Afghanistan into Canada. So may I now request the speaker to start his presentation.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Uh, well, before I proceed with my presentation on the settlement of the Ismaili Muslims in Canada, just as a prelude, I would like to introduce Canada as a country of destination for many refugees. So Canada first opened its door to the refugees belonging to the Religious Society of Friends in the second half of the 18th century, and they were being persecuted in England for their belief as a Christian community. In the late 18th century, the American Revolution caused a huge number of refugees to enter Canada, including 3,000 African Americans. The influx of refugees entering Canada continued from Poland when the country was overrun and annexed by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. The second half of the 19th century witnessed a large number of Jewish refugees running away from religious persecution and seeking protection in Canada. The flow of Jewish refugees continued into the 20th century and reached its peak in 1914 with 18,000 arrived in Canada. The next wave of refugees arriving in Canada was Ukrainians, first as a result of the Civil War and the country becoming part of the Soviet Socialist Republic in 1919, and then in post-Second World War reaching 400,000 in 1951. The 1970s witnessed 13,000 refugees from Chile, Bangladesh, initially a small number and then increased to hundreds. Between 1979 to 1980, 60,000 refugees from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam were settled in Canada. Another large group of refugees were Iraqis and Syrians. By the end of 2015, 25,475 Iraqi refugees, and the figure for the Syrian refugees settling in Canada by October 31st, 2020 is 44,620. Canada continues to be a sanctuary of persecuted communities around the world. Among the ethnic groups who became forced immigrants, refugees in the 1970s were the Ismaili Muslims of the East African country Uganda. Idi Amin, the country's president, expelled Ugandan citizens of Asian background. Among them were 7,000 Ismaili Muslims who were brought to Canada as refugees. The second and largest number of Ismaili refugees settled in Canada today are from Afghanistan, who were forced to leave their country as the result of the political crisis that ensued from deposing King Muhammad Zahir Shah on 17th July 1973. The political crisis is nowhere near resolved, and many Afghanistan nationals continue to be displaced as refugees, including Ismailis. Our focus in this paper is on those Ismailis of Afghanistan background who have been settled in Canada during the past 3 decades. Well, I want to just to introduce you to the context of the Ismaili community, the word Ismaili Tariqa and Ismaili Muslims, and which can be understood through the quotation that I have put on slide today from the constitution of the Shia Ismaili Muslims. It says the authority of the Imam in the Ismaili Tariqah is testified by a bay'ah, by the murid to the Imam, who is the act of acceptance, by the murid of the permanent spiritual bond between the Imam and the murid. This allegiance unites all Ismaili Muslims worldwide in their loyalty, devotion, and obedience to the Imam within the Islamic concept of universal brotherhood. To get to the, the data properly for the 30 years plus time, what happened, so what I did is a broad interview framework you can see on the screen, so that it is just I provided to those whom I interviewed, and so that it gives them a broader framework rather than exclusively structured interview, because that will constrain their flow of thought. So I let them speak and to this framework in the context of this particular process. Well, the Ismaili settlement in Canada started, as I said, and that in the 70s with the arrival of the community members as refugees from Uganda. And at that time, there was no Ismaili settlement in Canada. And you could find perhaps individual students studying at various educational institutions here and there. But when they arrived and there was no community, no institutional structure, and the settlement process and programs had to start right from the beginning for them to settle down. And then, of course, there were no community institutions to receive them. And so the institution had to be in place by them, and of course with the guidance of the Imam, and then those had to be structured for the community. So displaced Afghan Ismailis, again, emergence the issues, as I pointed out, that it started in 70s with the coup that came and deposed the king. And but since then, it has been a relation, and Afghan Ismailis have been, not only Ismailis, Afghan nationals have been displaced and refugees in different parts of the world. So, but that when this issue came up, so that you had to develop a relationship with the government, Canadian government, in order to be able to help them. And then a sponsorship process had to be initiated with the working with the government, with the authorization. That process had to be initiated. Institutional structure, because it is a large number of refugees now. So the community itself had not, being refugees, yes, they experienced the tough life of the refugees in the process, but they did not have the experience to receive or sponsor of the refugees at that particular time. So the interviews here, the methodology that I used is interviews. I have interviewed the past presidents of the Ismaili Council, Canada. They were actually leading at that time the community and in this process, and former chairman of the settlement committee, as the council had made a committee to handle the situation and to work to its goal. Former members of the council responsible for settlement portfolio. Initially, it was just a committee that was working, and then it became a portfolio in the board of the National Council for Canada. And managers responsible for the implementation, I interviewed those managers who are responsible. for doing implementing the agreement, that was in place to bring the refugees and all of that. So professional educators and social workers. So these professional educators and social right, to be responsible for educating, and also social workers to be helpful at the grassroots levels. So while I'm talking about it, so all these things are, okay, starting right from the beginning. And then I recorded with the permission of those whom I interviewed, permission granted, then all interviews were recorded using an app. The recorded interviews were transcribed, and together the transcribed document was single-lined 110 pages. Transcripts came. And then analysis, I arranged the participants' transcripts thematically, individual transcripts, and bringing together the selected passages under the relevant headings. Each selected excerpt under a subheading carries the participant's court name. For example, a passage is being shifted from one place to another. So in the beginning and at the end, it has a code. That code word actually represents the person who has been interviewed. So it's not mixed up with the who said what. So then it comes to the sources of information are referenced in the court names, so that until the whole document is finalized, so these codes will be very useful to keep the track of where the source is. So then writing the first draft. Okay, challenges. There were many challenges indeed in the process of the settlement, determining Afghan displaced Ismailis as certified refugees. At that point in the beginning, they were not refugees certified, because that has to be United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees certification. But there were displaced people everywhere. And those that need that certification in order to qualify to be in the process of settling here in Canada or coming here as a refugees. So language was another, language of communication was another real difficulty, because very few of the arrived members of the community understand and speak English, and majority were uneducated, and they could not even read the signs or anything in their own native, national, or local languages. So language of practice and traditions. So this was another important, because I think in the Dr. Kashshaf pointed out in his keynote address, there were, because people come, they bring with them their values and their traditions and their practices, be they cultural practices or religious practices. So it was the communication, and that it is a different environment. So, and in that case, here in Canada, the Jamaat who had been established, the community who had been established, Ismaili community, all of them came from East Africa, particularly from Uganda, and then increased from other parts. And all of them had a common one language, Gujarati, for the performance of ceremonies, for the performance of rituals and others. Apart from being the text of the ritual itself, the rest was all communication was in Gujarati. That was a challenge, definitely, because the newly arrived couldn't understand what was going on. Okay, the new Jamaat, and also accommodation was a big challenge, because the families were very big, sometimes from 10 to 14 people, and law doesn't allow to accommodate such people in one apartment. First of all, they were not available. If available, it was difficult to accommodate larger families. That was a challenge. Okay, education. Children were either they hadn't been to school, or if they had been, their level was way below their age group, and that was a huge challenge. And then because they had been going through various traumas and other places and difficulties, so they had challenges on that in terms of discipline and behavior. Employment was difficult because they were uneducated, and if educated, very minimum educated, and they didn't have any marketable skills as such. That was a challenge. Okay, there were two institutions responsible once they arrived here for their adjustment and settlement. The first one was Ismaili Council for Canada, and it put into the programs that was put, and the portfolio, the department was Settlement Committee and host family when they arrived at the airport, and one family was attached with each family to guide them and to settle. And learning centers were open in all Jamaat Khanas and to teach them with children, particularly with their homeworks and bringing up their English level. Mini school and during the summer programs, and also a special program, women development program, an employment center for those who, employable, and helping them with the information and resume, etc. Quality improvement program was on, and leadership development program. Next, please. And the other organization was Ismaili Tariqa and Religious Education Board Canada. So it was initially it was developed a concept and a strategy paper. Based on that, two seminars were. One seminar was focused, SPUN it was called. So it was focused on the community's organizational structure, their mandates and their working, so that they will get used to them and understand them. The other one was much more educational on the concept and other areas. And then during the Golden Jubilee, a very extended document was prepared for all related with all. All these programs were then delivered in Persian. And then lastly, the important thing was that for the language in the ceremonies and religious context, so it was then translated now along with Gujarati, also the Persian version, and duly authorized by the Imam of the time. And it is introduced now in Canada. You can offer the prayers in either language. The Afghan Ismaili refugees, Ismailis in Canada, well established and integrated. Majority of them are homeowners and have their businesses. If the younger generation, in the younger generation, there are doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, engineers, successful professionals in public and private sectors. The project provided the Ismaili institutions to establish a strong relationship with federal, provincial, and municipal governments and the communities. It contributed to the growth of the Ismaili institutions in successfully managing complex undertakings like refugee sponsorship and settlement. The Ismaili refugees came to Canada in groups with multiple identities based on their native languages, traditions, cultural practices, and tribal affiliations, and from different geographical locations, coming together with this immense diversity and collectively experiencing the challenges and opportunities. The Ismailis in Canada emerged as a strong community with a bedrock of local and national institutions. Ismailis are fully blended in the Canadian mosaic, participate fully in the Canadian society, and have risen as a microcosm of the global Ismaili community. This is the most fascinating transformation of the Canadian Ismaili identity. Thank you.